Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So we're studying Swami Prabhavananda's collection of talks, the collection of talks from 1936 to 1938 to 1976, collected as a book called Realizing God. And we're studying a particular talk called Overcoming Obstacles in Spiritual Life. And I'll start here. In actuality, there is one reality. Call that matter or call it spirit. There are not two realities. There is no division between matter and spirit. That here is one and there is the other. There is no division between matter and spirit. That here is one and there is the other. One time my master said to me, "Show me the line of demarcation where matter ends and spirit begins." And he offered him, the Swami, it was still Abani then, not Swami Prabhavananda. And he really offered him that as a direct challenge, because the Swami was saying you can't see, the Abani was saying that you can't see the world of spirit with your physical eyes. And so Brahmananda came out of his room having overheard Abani saying that, and said this in English: "Show me the line of demarcation. Show me the line of demarcation where matter ends and spirit begins." So he was saying, there is no line of demarcation. In other words, we experience only matter, but when we transform ourselves, we shall experience only spirit. I'm going to read that again. That's such a key idea. So first, show me the line of demarcation where matter ends and spirit begins. In other words, it is a spectrum. It is a continuum. In other words, we experience only matter at this end of the continuum, but when we transform ourselves, we shall experience only spirit. And in between, it's an ascension from the world of tamas and rajas, of matter, of materialism and vanity, to the revealing power of sattva, where we experience only spirit. In the words of Shankara, how can the physical eyes see anything but physical objects? How can the mind of the enlightenment man think of anything other than the reality? How can the physical eyes see anything but physical objects? How can the mind of the enlightened man think of anything other than the reality? Brahman. See Brahman everywhere, under all circumstances, with the eye of spirit and a tranquil heart. And this is possible. This is, if we read the book Love Poems from God, or the testimony of other saints in other settings, we see that this is what they come to, that they see the divine everywhere, under all circumstances, with the eye of spirit and a tranquil heart, To repeat, perfection is already in you. So this was said earlier in the talk. To repeat, perfection is already in you. You are one with God. No other perfection is possible. God is the perfect being, and that perfect being is within each one of us. In his infinite degree, not in part. We may perceive it in the beginning as we are part. That's part of that spectrum. We start thinking, I am, then we come to the conclusion based on the dawn of reverence that I am and the divine is. Later we begin to think the divine is and I am part, I am that, I am part of that. Ultimately, when we've come to the full end of the spectrum, we see that the divine, there is nothing but the divine. So, perfection is already in you. You are one with God. No other perfection is possible. God is the one perfect being, and that perfection is already in you. And that perfect being is within each one of us in his infinite degree, not in part. You are God. I am God. There is no other God but I. This is the universal experience. As you proceed in your spiritual path, ultimately, you will experience this. So I'm going to repeat, that's the end. See Brahman everywhere, under all circumstances, with the eye of spirit and a tranquil heart. That's the end of the Shankara quote. To repeat, perfection is already in you. You are one with God. No other perfection is possible. In other words, there are not two perfect beings. There's not two realities. As Swami Yogeshananda used to say, consciousness is primary and is not plural. You are one with God. No other perfection is possible. God is the one perfect being, and that perfect being is within each one of us in his infinite degree, not in part. You are God. I am God. There is no other God but I. This is the universal experience. In other words, we will all come to that experience. As you proceed in your spiritual path, ultimately you will experience this. St. John of the Cross said, the more the soul cleaves to created things, relying on its own strength by habit and inclination. So this is St. John of the Cross, one of the saints that is whose poems appear in that Love Poems from God. I thought that was the end of the talk, but it's not. St. John of the Cross said, the more the soul cleaves to created things, relying on its own strength by habit and inclination, the less it is disposed to this union, because it does not completely resign itself into the hands of God, that he may transform it supernormally. St. John of the Cross said, the more the soul cleaves to created things, relying on its own strength by habit and inclination, the less it is disposed to this union, because it does not completely resign itself into the hands of God, that he may transform it supernormally. The fact is that universe and the being and doing of universe is all the will of God. That's how it arose out of God's will that there be being and doing. But we're not meant to get stuck in it. We're not meant to, as St. John of the Cross says, cleave to created things. We, along with God, are simply to enjoy it, experience it, not get stuck on it, not get entangled with it. As Jesus said so simply and so eloquently, be passers-by. Just let the world and its doings be, and see behind it the divine will. And as St. John of the Cross says, resign yourself completely into the hands of God, that he transforms you supernormally. And this, of course, is what Krishna says in the Gita. Turn to me in faith and devotion. I see no sinner. In other words, your karma is of no consequence. I see no sinner. Holiness itself shall transform you, which is exactly what St. John of the Cross is saying, that he may transform you supernormally. So before we go on, because the Swami's taking a turn now and telling us how to do things to make this happen, are there any questions and comments about what's been said so far? Because this is such a critical idea that the reality is the divine. We're seeing it with our physical eyes, but we don't recognize it as such. But if we cling to, if we cleave to the things that we see and we experience through the senses, this will forever, or for a time, not forever certainly, but it will for a long time keep us bound to that. So any comments or questions?
Yes.
Please.
I'm not trying to at all change Brahmananda's words in the show me the line of demarcation, but I rephrase it a little bit for myself, for my understanding, because the first part of that paragraph says in actuality, there is one reality, call that matter or call it spirit. There are not two realities. And then the quote from him is, show me the line of demarcation where spirit ends. And it's the next one, sorry. In other words, we experience only matter, but when we transform ourselves, we shall experience only spirit. My interpretation of that would be, in other words, we experience the reality as matter, but when we transform ourselves, we shall experience reality as spirit, because it's the same thing.
Yes, that's exactly why the evening hymn, the evening prayer, Breaker of this world's chain, starts this way. Breaker of this world's chain, we adore thee, whom all men love. This that they're experiencing and may love. They may love it as power. They may love it as money. They may love it as their car or their house or their wife and children or their grandchildren or whatever it is. No matter what they think it is the divine, because that's all there is. There's only one reality. So you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Good insight and good rephrasing so that you can assimilate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone?
Hari Om Shankaraji.
Hari Om Balakrishna. So good to hear from you.
I just wanted to bring it because the Jnana Yoga tells us that every experience has two components, the matter as well as the spirit. It's only our responsibility to pay attention to every experience and see what is the matter and what is the spirit and stick with the spirit. So
well, this is
one way
this is the way of the Jnana Yogi. The
Yeah.
Jnana Yogi says all that can be experienced, anything that can be has as its component experience, experiencer, and experienced, is part of the dream, is part of the not real. And so they discriminate against that. This is one posture. This that the Swami is describing, and St. John of the Cross was describing, is what Sri Ramakrishna called vijnana, special knowledge. And that is that there is a level above jnana in which you see everything as the reality. You don't see it. It's not the way the bhakta sees it. The bhakta, particularly in the early stages, sees it dualistically. Oh, this is God's glory, and all of this is His creation. I love this, and I don't love this so much, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, even in the bhakta path, even in the bhakta's path, you come to it's all the divine presence. So what the Swami is describing here is what Sri Ramakrishna said is a level above the jhana's way. And so the jnani will say, anything that can be experienced, I don't have
Sorry.
Somebody's got some music playing. And that is definitely a valid and workable path. Very difficult. Very difficult. Because to annihilate, as that's the word that Vashishta uses in talking to Rama, to annihilate all of the apparent reality is very difficult for the embodied soul. So the Swami is talking about something that Sri Ramakrishna commented on. And Adi Shankaracharya gestured to it. He said that this isn't an unreality that we are experiencing. It's simply a relative reality. By relative means it is always changing. And so don't cling to it. So you're absolutely right, Balakrishna ji, that you described accurately the Jnani's path. But what the Swami here is describing is what Sri Ramakrishna is described as vijnana.
I agree with you 100%. Actually, the Swamiji says to understand Aham Brahmasmi is jnana, and the same jnana, when you look at the universe as nothing but Brahman, is vijnana. This is the same thing even Ramakrishna said. When you walk these stairs up, you think, when once you go up, you see there is nothing, the stairs as well as the roof, they both are made of the same material.
Yes.
That is the vijnana. So exactly the same thing. So
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Wonderful. Anything else, anyone? Thank you, Balakrishnaji. Okay, so now the Swami is making a turn. He's gone from a description of what is to be attained, and now he's going to talk about how to attain it. Now, what is the way? Just as you have to have physical exercises and intellectual training, even so the training of the spirit is possible only through the exercise of the spirit. So I'm going to say that, I'm going to read that again because I read it poorly. Now, what is the way? Just as you have to have physical exercises and intellectual training, even so the training of the spirit is possible only through the exercise of the spirit. There is no other way. What is meant by exercise of the spirit? To discipline the mind in the first place. Undisciplined thinking and habits and behavior lead us nowhere. You have to discipline the mind completely. Now that sounds forbidding, doesn't it? In fact, what happens is, as you start down the road toward disciplining the mind, certain other things happen, as we'll hear described, that, as Krishna puts it in the Gita, holiness itself shall transform you. And this is what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. In the talk, I Will Tell You a Secret, is just exactly what is meant by how the mind comes under discipline completely, but it is not, according to certain ways of doing it, it is not arduous or forbidding. In the Kena Upanishad, we read, having given up the false identification of the self with the senses and the mind, and knowing the self to be Brahman, the wise, on departing the world, become immortal. That is the goal to be achieved. But to find that is the goal to be achieved, but I find a misunderstanding in almost every student of Vedanta. They try to get rid of their egos. A wonderful idea, but how can you totally get rid of your ego, this empirical self, until you have got hold of the Atman? In other words, we use the ego, we use the left mind and the properties of the mind. We use them. And then the Swami says, only in samadhi, when you have attained the knowledge of Atman and have become yourself, does the empirical self drop off. Actually, Sri Ramakrishna says it doesn't drop off entirely. It becomes like a shy child and is no longer, asserts itself. But I'm just adding what Sri Ramakrishna says to what the Swami says. Only in samadhi, and he's not talking about nirvikalpa samadhi here, he's talking about savikalpa samadhi. Only in samadhi, when you have attained the knowledge of Atman. Knowledge of Atman is an experience. That by definition is savikalpa, within the realm of time, space, and causation. The knowledge of the Atman and have become yourself. But what does that mean? Your self-identification changes once you've had this experience of this knowledge of God, and you identify yourself as that. But it's still an experience. You are identifying yourself as that. This nirvikalpa, there's no knower left. There's no mind there. So when you have the knowledge of Atman and have become yourself, the empirical self drops off. And without your ego, how can you struggle? How can you meditate? Who is there to meditate on whom? Who is there to worship? All of this is with this, as I said, we use the ego, the left mind, we use that to purify the left mind. How can you meditate? Who is there to meditate on whom? Who is there to worship? As long as we are in the relative plane, there has to be an ego. Self-consciousness or ego has to evolve before one can reach the complete unfoldment of divinity. This ego, again, has two aspects, which Sri Ramakrishna described as the ego of knowledge and the ego of ignorance. So the ego has avidya, the ego of ignorance, and vidya, the ego of knowledge. First, we have to kill the ego of ignorance. What does this mean? The Swami now defines it. First, we have to kill the ego of ignorance. I am such and such, an intelligent person. I know more than you. I know more than any of you. I am proud to be an American. I take pride in having this and that. That's the ego of ignorance. As long as we identify with all that. And is there anything wrong with that? No, it's just simply not going to lead you to to real happiness. As long as you have those thoughts. I am such and such, an intelligent person. I know more than any of you. I am proud to be an American. I take pride in having this and that. It's just very limited. Happiness does not exist within that kind of limitation. Freedom, by definition, does not exist within that kind of limitation. We need to go beyond it. So the Swami says, this is the ego that leads to great bondage, that separates us from everybody else and distinguishes us as somebodies. It leads to great bondage that separates us from everybody else. Do we see this in the world around us right now? People who are so insistent on their individuality, their rights, their ability to do as they please, separate from anyone else. I won't wear a mask. I won't wear a mask, even though that would protect my loved ones, not to mention everyone else. I won't do that because that's not how I see myself. That's not who I am. And so we see this ignorance playing itself out in these kinds of settings. It separates us from everybody else. And there is one of the sources of our greatest pain and anguish, is that sense of separation from others. And as the Swami says, and distinguishes as somebodies. I am somebody. Well, welcome to your woe. Welcome to your anguish. The ego that ego has to be killed. But have instead the ego of knowledge. I am a child of God. I am a servant of God. Everybody is a child of God. I'm not better than anybody. How is it said in Chaitanya's prayer? Oh, my mind. This is the aspirant, having recognized their wretched condition, speaks to themselves. Oh, my mind, be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all. And then Chaitanya's prescription, chant unceasingly the name of the Lord. O my mind, be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all. Chant unceasingly the name of the Lord. So have instead the ego of knowledge. I am a child of God. I am a servant of God. Everybody is a child of God. I'm not better than anybody. At the same time, have the confidence that you are pure. Then you can approach God. And the saints say this, particularly a couple of the saints in that book, Love Poems from God, say, your mind will trick you. It'll say that you are impure, that you are not worthy to be in the presence of God, forgetting that it is God that created you, and nothing that God created is unworthy of being in his or her presence. One of the things from one of the poets is, you cannot be, God said to me, you cannot be what I am not. You cannot be what I am not. In other words, the mirror image of that is, you can only be what I am. And the underlying idea is, I am all of it. So the Swami says, at the same time, have the confidence that you are pure. Then you can approach God. God is simple. God wants to love us. God wants that relationship of love with us. We are the children of the divine. This ego of knowledge is very important in order to ultimately transcend it. This ego of knowledge is very important in order to ultimately transcend it. But first, we must eliminate the ego of ignorance. So the good ego leads you to freedom, the ego of knowledge. And so the good ego leads you to freedom, the bad ego to bondage. And we're welcome to our bondage. As Sri Ramakrishna said, when the gentleman from Calcutta came to him, having heard that he was preaching renunciation to their children, and they were fussing about it, they came to him and they said, tell us, why should we not enjoy the world? And Sri Ramakrishna said, go, enjoy the world. I have no objection. But when you are sick of it, return to me. I have the cure. So he said, you're welcome to your bondage. You're welcome to your enjoyment of the world and all that that entails, which is the dark as well as the light, the anguish as well as the pleasure, and your attachment to pleasure and the pain that that causes you. So the good ego leads you to freedom, the bad ego to bondage. And as I said, we're welcome to our bondage if that's what we still want. And according to the psychologist Patanjali, there are the obstacles of attachment, aversion, and the desire to cling to life. Considering clinging to life as an obstacle will be misunderstood immediately. Let me repeat that. Clinging to life as an obstacle will be misunderstood immediately. It does not mean that we should commit suicide, but let me quote Christ. He who loves this life shall lose it. The clinging to this surface life, the clinging to this surface life is instinctive in every one of us. When you practice meditation, now this people ask questions about this all the time. So here's the Swami's answer. When you practice meditation, you find that your mind is becoming absorbed in the consciousness of God, but you have not yet got hold of it, and that makes you restless. So let me repeat that. When you practice meditation, you find that your mind is becoming absorbed in the consciousness of God. But you have not yet got hold of it. And that makes you restless. What does he mean? You have this other feeling, this other sense of the divine presence, the living presence. But there's all of these things that interrupt that. We haven't got hold of it. We can't hold on to it. So all of these other things come in and make us restless. Restless. In other words, we can't abide in that calm feeling of the living presence. We get drawn away. We make it restless. When you practice meditation, you find that your mind is becoming absorbed in the consciousness of God. But you have not yet got hold of it, and that makes you restless. Even a great soul like Christ, even if a great soul like Christ or Ramakrishna gives you the ultimate experience with a touch, you say, no, 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 I don't want it. Let's just let that sink in. Sri Ramakrishna tells the story of 3 fisherwomen who had sold their catch and were going home and got caught in a storm. And they had their baskets, their fish baskets with them that still smelled of the fish. And they were given shelter in a place where there were many, many flowers. And they were put to sleep there, and their fish baskets were left outside. They were all restless. They couldn't sleep. They had to have their fish baskets that smelled of fish. Then they could sleep. So, again, this is not an indictment. This is not saying you have to be something else. The Swami is saying, in our present condition, if a Christ or a Ramakrishna were to give us the experience of transcendence of freedom with a touch, we would say, no, 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 where's my fish basket? I can't sleep without my fish basket. And it's not that you're wrong. You're simply not home yet. Such is our instinctive desire for the surface life. Such is our instinctive desire, clinging to the surface life. Even when you are a spiritual aspirant, struggling hard to find God, when the grace of God comes, it strikes you like thunder. When the grace of God comes, it strikes you like thunder. You feel as if you're going to be killed, and you say, no, no, no. And that may happen a number of times. But through the grace of God, you pass through that stage and have no more time to be afraid. You are in that other deeper life that transcends this ego, this life. And when that happens, you're not even aware. You simply lose your body and mind consciousness. That's what happens. That's what he means by saying, you have no more time to be afraid. You are in that other deeper life that transcends this ego, this life. How to overcome these obstacles? The way can be likened to a dirty cloth. To clean it, you need to apply soap and then wash it in clear water. The dirt of attachment and aversion is in our minds. We have created karmas and all their impressions in our minds. Now a new character has to be formed. Patanjali points out what soap in spiritual life is. So Patanjali defines what the soap is. This is the niyamas: austerity, study, and dedication to God. These are the preliminary steps to yoga. So the soap, first we have to take on the responsibility of practicing the yamas, turning ourselves away from being adversarial with the world, taking from the world, defending ourselves, putting ourselves first. Now, it doesn't happen all at once, and you practice it at the same time you're practicing the niyamas. But this is how you actually become a spiritual aspirant. And it is then that you do what Patanjali points out. Patanjali points out what the soap in spiritual life is: austerity, study, and dedication to God. These are the preliminary steps to yoga. The practice of meditation is the water in which to wash. But as my master said, who can meditate? Meditation is next to samadhi. It is a constant, unbroken flow of thought toward God. In other words, we must be absorbed. That absorption is the last stage before samadhi, illumination. Your mind may be slothful, but even if you're lazy, you can still lie down and chant the name of God. That is to say, make japa, say a mantra. If you don't even have the desire for God, pray that you may have that desire and chant the name. Notice the exclamation point. Pray that you may have that desire and chant the name. Patanjali said that one practice can lead you to the highest illumined knowledge of God. So now that was the actual end of the talk. So I'm going to go back and read a little bit. But as my master said, who can meditate? That's the end of the quote. The Swami Prabhavananda says, meditation is next to samadhi. It is a constant, unbroken flow of thought toward God. In other words, we must be absorbed. That absorption is the last stage before samadhi, illumination, enlightened knowledge. So here's the secret. Think of your chosen ideal and chant his name. It is that simple. You may find your mind may be slothful. So he's saying, chant the name. Your mind may be slothful, but even if you're lazy, you can still lie down and chant the name of God. If you don't even have the desire for God, pray that you may have that desire and chant the name. Now, you may not believe in this. Fine. All I can say is these are remarkable people who are recommending this to you. Try it. Try it. And it doesn't matter what the name of your chosen ideal is. It doesn't matter. As Sri Chaitanya says in his prayer, various are thy names, O Lord. In each and every name thy power resides. So it doesn't matter what name. Just try it. Because the Swami says, Patanjali said, quote, that one practice can lead you to the highest illumined knowledge of God. So now we've had a description of what the goal is, and we've had the Swami's description of what a path, it's the Bhakta's path, which combines Bhakta and Bhakti and Raja Yoga, the practice of meditation. Meditation is very much a part of the Bhakta's path. If you go beyond the formalities, you go to the practice of contemplation, concentration, and meditation. So we have a few minutes before the end of the hour. Is there anything anyone would like to ask or say? This is that sacred time in which we study the art of spirituality together. Yes, Robert.
Yes, I have. The story that you told about the ladies in the fish basket, what I recognize right away is it's habit. We are creatures of habit.
Oh, yes.
And stories like that actually bring it home to us and make us realize and recognize how much we are attached to this habit. But that particular, and that you followed with the washing of it, but I have my experience, if it doesn't need to be cleaned, it needs to be understood. If I can understand and know that I'm doing this straight out of habit, the knowledge of my knowingness of that, it can be the greatest aid that I have of being able to eliminate it or overcome it.
Perfect, Robert. Exactly. And this is what the practice of contemplation, concentration, and meditation does for us. It gives us the knowledge that these habits are impediments for me. They are because we see them. They constantly interrupt. Their restless insistence interrupts and interrupts and interrupts our attention to contemplate, concentrate, and meditate. And so we see, oh my God, this is part of the problem. This is what's keeping me trapped. So you're absolutely right, Robert. Then when we know that,
when I try to overcome them, though, it takes so much effort to overcome them. It's much easier to understand them and come from another position on them.
Well, that's it. The understanding of them, particularly if we're practicing some sort of prayer or japam, saying a mantra and so on. What happens is the awareness that arises in us because of the practice of the centering prayer or contemplative prayer or repetition of a mantra or visualization or watching our breath, whatever it is, the awareness that arises in us because of doing that, we see how much more congenial, how much more blissful that awareness is than the one that is part of our habits. Our habits may yield some temporary pleasure, but it's not much and it doesn't last. And one of the problems with it, as Patanjali points out, is those pleasures themselves become a source of pain because we yearn after them. And so, as you say, Robert, understanding for you is the key. Each one of us is unique, utterly, utterly unique. There are things that we share in common, like having habits. But how we undo this, how we make progress beyond the immediate, beyond where we are right now, for each of us, it will have its uniqueness. And that's one of the great joys, that we are the creative force as well as the understanding force. So we create, we ultimately contrive our own way out of this. You know, if you watch 6 different people walk, they all walk very differently. As a matter of fact, some of the police identification mechanisms identify people by their gait. It's so distinctive. So we will find our own way to walk. But the principles are those that the Swami talked about. And definitely the practice of centering prayer, contemplative prayer, japam, that kind of thing, chanting a mantra, it definitely does produce this other consciousness, this other awareness. Thank you, Robert. Anyone else?
Brother Shankara?
Go ahead,
Yes.
hon.
Oh,
Yes, Haima.
I cannot disagree even a bit of this chapter. Every single word is so powerful. So
Yes.
powerful, and it does work.
Mhm.
Regardless of our daily chores and duties and jobs and other things. If we do a little bit of this, it really works.
Yes.
It really works.
Well, that's what I said. You know,
Yes.
we may not believe in this as we sit here right now. We may have our doubts. All I can say is this is the prescription of a very experienced physician
Exactly.
who comes from a line of very powerful physicians. So just try the medicine
Yes.
and see whether it works for you.
Yes, just like we go for physical exercises to a fitness center, this one is much easier. We can sit at home and do it. Set aside just a little bit of time every day, especially at a later age after you finish raising children and all this. Even when you're raising children, this is doable. If we
Yeah.
know this path, it's doable. A lot of us didn't know this, but we just do the prayers continuously. But this is the best path. I
Well,
realize. Thank you so much.
out of compassion,
Yes.
out of its illimitable love and compassion, as Sri Ramakrishna says, practice just a little and
So,
someone will come forward to help you.
exactly.
Because of that, it's as long as your yearning is toward the divine and away from the mundane, you will get help. And Sri Krishna really spells it out in chapter 5.
Literally.
Cindy, you had something?
Thank you.
Thank you, Haima. Thank you.
Yes. I just wanted to go back a little bit to what Bob was talking about, because this, talking about habits and, things that it's very hard, it is what gets in our way. And I think when Bob brought up about, it doesn't need to be cleaned, it needs to be understood. I agree that understanding is very helpful. Just personally, though, I think sometimes these words can get in the way, like, soap and water, and it's dirty, so we must clean it. It doesn't need to be cleaned because it's dirty, like you dirty bad sinner or whatever. It's not because it's dirty that needs to be cleaned. It's because it's in the way.
Yes.
It's like some people are cleaning fanatics and everything must be clean all the time. This is just on a material level. Other people, the dust piles up and they're happy as they can be. But if that dust is in your way of something you want to see, you've got to clean it. And it's not because it's bad. It's just because it's in your way. Okay. There's that. But there's the understanding why you're attached to something. Yes, can be very, I think it's necessary too, Bob. I really do. But once you understand it or think you understand it, for me, the next step is to substitute something else.
Yes.
Because so many of us go, I don't want to, for instance, I want to quit smoking, so I'm just not going to smoke. I'm not going to smoke. You have to substitute, you have to say, well, instead of a cigarette, I'm going to go walk around the block. So instead of adhering to my crazy mind going out and going out, I'm not going to sit there and go, I'm not going to let my thoughts, you substitute a mantra or something else that is not only distracting from the habit on one hand, but on the second hand, third hand, it is leading you toward what you really want.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm done.
Well, thank you, Cindy. All that is so good and so true. And one of the things about a mantra is all mantras contain spiritual power. That's the nature of mantras. And if anyone wants to talk to me personally about what the meaning of that is, I'll be happy to. But let me just say it again. All mantras, by their nature, have the ability to retrack our mind. And the way they do that is they stop the whirlpool action of the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions of our mind. The whirlpools, the vrittis as they're called. What is a vritti? A vritti is, the translation is a whirlpool. And what the whirlpool does is pull us down from knowledge, from the knowledge that exists always and is just behind the screen of our distraction. The distraction is made of these whirlpools. The mantra has the capacity to stop the whirlpools. And when you learn to practice the mantra so that you can do it for at least 12 seconds uninterruptedly, something else emerges and you feel it. And it is not the same thing as a physical feeling perception. It's a different thing entirely. And you think, oh, where has that been all my life? Well, it's always been there. We have peak experiences, etc. But it's been disguised. It's been distracted from by these whirlpools that are constantly pulling you down away from it. So a mantra has that power. That's what it is. It is a form of sound that does not have inherent meaning, but as in a literal sense, like a word does. But it has the effect of stopping the whirlpools. So that's why a mantra. That's why the Swami recommends a mantra.
Hello, Brother Shankara.
Yes, Vijay.
Just as we said last week that gunas are not my gunas or your gunas, they're just gunas. Same way, I believe it would be fair to say that ego is not my ego or anyone's ego. It is ego by itself. It is what aspect of that ego I am displaying at any point in time. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, very well said. The ego is simply a flawed reflection of the one ego, the one I maker. Ahamkara is not a possession, is not an attribute of the human form. Ahamkara is an attribute of the divine form. Now, ultimately, to be fully human is to be fully divine, so that you begin to embody the real I. This is exactly where Ramana Maharshi comes from. Find that real I, and you've left way behind this false reflection in the mind, the intellect, the coverings, the sheaths of our body that each have their own flawed reflection of the ahamkara. And so we think we're separate beings. We think we're generating this I-ness, but in fact, no, it's simply a reflection. Just as you are not the reflection in a mirror, you are emphatically not the reflection in a dirty, cracked mirror. And that's what it is that we're repairing and cleaning when we do our spiritual practices. We're revealing the true reflection. And when we see it, we see we see that it is a reflection, and we see that it is glorious, but we stop identifying with the reflection and start identifying with that which is reflected. So well said, Vijay. Well said.
Thank you, Brother Shankara. Thank you. The time is almost up, but speaking of the mantra, I want to share with our friends over here a first-hand experience, very briefly, to bring the same point home that you said about the power of mantra. I used it in practice 2 days ago. Somehow, for reason unknown to me and Neera, I stood up from the bed and my right knee got locked and I had excruciating pain to the extent that I could not move it a half inch left or right even. It would hurt extremely. After struggling with it for about a half hour, called the 24-hour medical hotline, and the nurse said that this, you cannot do anything, you have to go to emergency now, saying I'll call you in 30 minutes to find out what you have decided. And I had decided to just resort on my mantra, looking at Thakur's picture and mother's picture and remembering Swami Yogeshanandaji's face in my mind because he's the one who gave me mantra. I kept repeating mantra and talking to Thakur that you have put the power in this mantra. I rely on you. You are my, my faith is in you. You will take care of me. Pain was extreme. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was 11, that kind. Finally, at 1 o'clock, I resorted to just being in a certain position. I was able to fall asleep. And in the morning, the miracle, when I woke up, all the pain was gone. 0. From 1 to 10, I was at 10 at 1 o'clock at night. In the morning, it was 0 with the power of mantra and Thakur's grace. Just want to share that with all of you in terms of the power of the beach.
What a lovely story. And what a gift. What a gift. So there is indeed power in the mantra. There is power in our prayer. As Vivekananda says, it does not come from outside us. It comes from the dynamic power of the mind within, the deep mind, not the superficial mind, but these so-called miracles. They come from the divinity within us, the power that manifests because of that divinity being present.
I still am not able to understand at all. And
It's
I
not
believe
a
it is not
question
for
of
me to
understanding.
understand.
It's not a question of understanding. There's no way to understand.
Yes. In terms of the miracle, that how could it happen that I could go from 10 to 0 when I get up in the morning? It's amazing. It's a grace.
Read the preface. Read the preface to Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. You will understand. As much as we can understand, you'll have an understanding. Read the preface to Swami Vivekananda's book, Raja Yoga.
I will do it today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? All right, dearly beloved. Well, we've gathered together on a Saturday to listen to the Swami Prabhavananda. We've come to the end of the talk on overcoming obstacles in spiritual life. And the next will be path of meditation. He was recommending meditation in brief. Now he'll go into it for a full talk, the path of meditation, which of course is one of the names of a chapter in the Gita. That's one translation. So that's what we'll take up next Saturday. If there's nothing else, then we'll close with this lovely idea. Various are thy names, O Lord, in each and every name thy power resides. No times are set, no rites are needful for chanting of thy name. So vast is thy mercy. How huge then is my wretchedness, who find in this empty life and heart no devotion to thy name. O my mind, be humbler than a blade of grass. Be patient and forbearing like the tree. Take no honor to thyself. Give honor to all. Chant unceasingly the name of the Lord. O Lord and soul of the universe, mine is no prayer for wealth or retinue, the playthings of lust or the toys of fame. As many times as I may be reborn, grant me, O Lord, a steadfast love for thee. And of course, we are reborn each time we go to sleep and wake up. As many times as I may be reborn, grant me, O Lord, a steadfast love for thee. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beings everywhere. And since we can't salute you in the parking lot, we'll salute you here. May you go in Mother's loving and protective embrace. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. To those of you who are celebrating Diwali, happy Diwali. May it bring you much joy and much feeling of bonding with the Divine Presence. All right, dears. Oh, I don't know if you can see behind us. As a Diwali gift, somebody gave us this lovely little Krishna, the Krishna of the Rasa Leela in Vrindavan. So beautiful. So it's become part of this little altar here, rather than the one in the shrine, because you can't see that one. So it's here. Lovely little image of Krishna. All right, dears. Until next time, tomorrow morning's talk is I Will Tell You a Secret. If you want to know what it's about, you can go to the website or the Facebook page and find. I won't give you a commercial. I'll just give you a commercial for the commercial. So if you want to know what tomorrow morning's talk is about, the title is I Will Tell You a Secret. It's a quote from Swami Brahmananda. Until then, or the next time we see one another, much love. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.